All right, so we are going to talk about Eddie Izzard, who is absolutely one of my favorite comedians. They will stand up in drag, and the Cake and Death episode that I'm going to show you, or the little snippet from one of his comedy shows, Eddie is standing there in their kimono. As a note, Eddie at one point went by he, but dressed in drag, and only recently did Eddie begin to feel that they've been honored because they've been spoken to as she. And it's important because, Eddie in many of their, in movies, you've probably seen Eddie as a male. In stand up, you see Eddie as female. And there's this really beautiful, kind of balance in what they want to identify as. And I think that's brilliant. And Eddie recently had, in 2021, accepted the label of she. And for Eddie, that was a really big thing, recognizing to be seen as who they feel they really truly are. When we talk about toxic masculinity and labels and all of these things and identifying, this story of Eddie going from this transition throughout life and their career and watching it. And when Eddie comes out and says, I identify as she, well, we know this, we see this, you have given this to us throughout your entire career. And it doesn't always work that way. It is hard sometimes for people to maybe recognize the change from what you felt somebody should be because you've labeled them as such, to see how they can become who they feel they are. And that's a really big understanding, to recognize that it is not easy for someone to go from what society they feel maybe society needs to see them as versus how they would prefer to be seen as. And I would love that we all within this class have this freedom to feel that we can choose as we continue through life to decide what we want to be. I do need to make a statement where, last semester I had a student say something wildly inappropriate along the lines of, oh, you can identify so much as a refrigerator nowadays. And that is wildly inappropriate and completely inaccurate. That's not what we're doing here. We are recognizing human beings for human beings. And statements and dialogue like that will not be, I will not take that. I'm sorry, I cannot. Especially with all the work that we're doing here to try and recognize who people are and why it's important for them to recognize that they can change to be who they recognize who they are. So, in other words, let's be respectful and recognize that we get to choose, and to say, inappropriate things out of ignorance will not be tolerated. I will ask you some questions, and maybe the dean might have some questions for you too. This is not to say I'm, not asking you to, have conversations, but let's be mindful before we say things that might be inappropriate and just kind of ignorant. We're going to be less, opinionated on some of these things and just go, okay, didn't know, not quite what I was thinking, but here it is. Okay, so, and I say that because we're going to watch Eddie Izzard in a stand-up called, his stand-up in 1999 was called Cake or Death. And it might not make total sense to you, but I just want you to get an understanding of who Eddie Izzard is, and then we'll come back in a little bit.